I am now recording. So yeah, so please just, we were talking about sense making, and you were about to describe this well, you began describing this analogy, and then I was like, wait, I need to record this. So please.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, let me even reflect back just a little bit of our prior conversation about how we got into this, because we were talking
Hmm.
about um, our impressions about stupid decisions that collective bodies have made,
Hmm.
or decisions that we think are stupid. For instance, opening the liquor stores in South Africa for very limited periods, which will cause congestion, which
Right.
eliminates social distancing,
Hmm.
and seems totally counterproductive to the point. Right. Just
Yeah.
one example, and
Yeah. We could find
so
many. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we were talking about our forming the process of collecting information. We have this idea that stupid decisions are made in collectives because of a compromise process, and challenges and actually coming to some kind of consensus that generates good decisions.
Hmm.
um,
You end up
and
watering down an idea because one group hates it this way, another group hates it this way. So to get everyone to sort of agree, you need to take off so much that you end up with kind of a crap idea. That was
yeah.
my hypothesis I threw in there.
Yep, yep, and which I think is an accurate description of the process. And then, so then the next leap was, we have this intuition that this happens all the time. How could we verify that intuition? Is it even possible to verify that intuition? And we talked
Hmm.
about going out and talking to people, and collecting data, and kind of concluded that for something like this, it's not realistic to think that we're going to be able to build a data set that's going to falsify a hypothesis, or
Right.
otherwise do something reliable and interesting. So we can kind of leave it and move on. But it does bring up the question of, so what I'm seeing, that we, in some sense, we did something there. We made sense, right?
Yeah.
Sense making. We have a hypothesis that enables us to recognize a pattern in the world and sort of be able to go, yeah, that's one of that fits that pattern. That's why that happens. It's
Hmm.
just one
Hmm.
more instance of that thing. I think that's, at some level, I think that's what sense making is. That's, when I hear that term, it's the process by which we uh, identify patterns and use those patterns as categories to be able to categorize the perceptions we have of the world at large,
Hmm. Hmm.
and uh, to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hey,
So,
Christian, you're welcome, and sorry, I'm on a roll already. Um, but and I can't hear you
I
either.
can't hear you. Yeah. Um, so, oh, we hear you now.
So
Here, let me pause the recording. We'll do some technical.
cool.
Okay, so we're on mine now. So we were talking about sense making, and the point you were just on, Gordon, was that um, well, earlier before we started recording, you were kind of saying like, what is sense making? You have an intuitive idea of what it is, and then what you were just saying now is it seems like maybe sense making is sort of figuring, like seeing a pattern in the world and kind of using it to you didn't say this, but where my mind was going was like predict what would happen, or give us more utility in the world, make us maybe just more powerful would be another way to put it. Um, and Yeah, I agree with that. I could speak to that, but I think I'd rather you continue on with what you were saying, if you'd like.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah. Um, so yeah, categories, ways of understanding the world. So um, all this came to the reason why, for for anybody watching, for Christian, why Logan said, "Oh wait, let's record this." So we started talking about this idea, this thing that I have, a way of, I'm going to call it sense making now. Maybe it's a slightly different definition, but this pattern and analogy that I use, that I keep coming back to, which is essentially that we as individuals are to the global society of humans as neurons are to a human being's brain. And furthermore, that there's, it's questionable whether consciousness is an an emergent phenomenon, or if it's somehow inherent in neurons or otherwise. But to me, at least, it's clear that I don't have the neurological basis for this, but I have this image, right? If you look at fMRI pictures or something, and you can sort of watch people thinking. And one of the manifestations of people thinking is like these patterns of energy moving around in the brain, clumps of neurons firing together, and different, however the fMRIs are picking it up, different things are lighting up. And so I have this kind of image of seeing something like this. I think of a picture of a head with sort of rainbow colored lights sort of circulating, and again, I can't think of the technical device that does this, but so, the fact that they can put electrodes on our scalps and read our brain waves, right, is another indication of how, there's these like waves of energy, not in any mystical sense. It's just, it's electrical, chemical energy firing and moving around.
Propagating wave through the neuronal synaptic network.
Yeah, exactly. And I hypothesize that the same kind of phenomena, or very analogous kind of phenomena, at least at the fundamental level of energy shifts, happens within this broad human society that surrounds the planet. Right, and that it's, that as individual neurons, of the functionality that we have of all the multiple connections that we make as individuals, gives us a certain kind of relevance as individual neurons. The neurologists will say neurons that fire together wire together. So that's part of how we form habits. And so somehow that tied into the previous conversation as explanatory of something, but
well,
it also seems fun to talk about just in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree sorry, were you?
Nope.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Yeah, I also am very excited about that idea, and the reason I got so excited when you first said it is because that's something I also have thought about a lot, and I find it a useful metaphor. And I think maybe what made you think of it was that we were talking about, I was saying how when I have a theory that I'm like, well, I don't even know if that's true, or just an idea in my head, but I can't go gather data, like I can't go look up a study or make my own ad hoc study. I have found I just got to go ask people, and people within my network that I trust, and people outside of my network, so I know I'm sort of correcting a bias. And so to connect those two ideas, I'm just being a good little neuron, and I'm finding these, and the close friends would be my strong synapses because we fire together, which I suppose you could say is like thinking together at least. And also maybe reaching across the brain to someone that is not in my close network, although I don't know how exactly that links up to the metaphor. But yeah, I think also that model gives me comfort because I'm slowly sort of teaching myself that I don't need to go make a big impact and be an Elon Musk of the world. I can act locally and propagate outward, my thoughts. I can consume and produce content and be a little node in the network, and that's fine. And the image of being a neuron in a brain adds a lot of comfort to that for me.
Mm-hmm.
I find that like every sort of discussion around sense making always involves a network, and I think like the idea of being in sense making as something that cannot be done alone, I think is really important, because especially when we deal with more complex issues like COVID or like these social upheavals that are going on, it's sort of, you can't really understand it on your own. That's why we sort of have to defer to a sort of a shared consensus or a shared sort of collective networking opportunity. So
collective
that's where
really ties a lot of this together.
Yeah. So that's what like brought me in the first place. So
yeah. Yeah, I think probably the reason the term collective intelligence is so exciting to me is specifically because Gordon and I had that analogy running in my head at the time. And I thought, especially with the internet, it's like, well, that's where we already have, but we're a collective intelligence, but we're going to get to something, well, a phase shift of sorts. It's how it feels to me. So I think that's definitely what has attracted me to these kinds of topics too. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, one of the
Yeah, I'm
things
sort
that
of
I think is really interesting in exploring this analogy, and Christian, I'll throw this out there and then hand the floor over to you. Um, uh, as human beings, everybody's becoming increasingly aware that we have many, many layers of motivations, and that the thoughts that we're conscious of are only a small part of what's happening in our, within our consciousness. And obviously this goes way back to Freud and Jung and all of that stuff as well. But I think that the same analogy, that analogy maps onto the picture of the world, and that there's so many different threads, there's so many different systems that there's certainly nothing unified. And being able to pick apart all the different threads and see how the waves go, is possibly a pathway to having a much richer and more a richer understanding and a better ability to predict and understand. So Christian, sorry, you were going to say something.
yeah, and I think I can tie it to the idea of like exploring many principles, because what we're trying to sense make towards is more towards an integrated truth rather than a sort of rational truth. Because I guess when you look back to like the Peterson and Harris debates, and Harris tries to like debate the idea for like a rational truth that would sort of like solve everything, but Peterson goes back against that, obviously, because we are not fully rational beings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the danger in sort of having a collective sense-making network is to fall into like the perfect rationale, when really we should be heading towards more integration and more of an acknowledgement of that people are irrational, and that we got to explore the sort of existential and the human conditions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like this is really making me think of Jung now. Even just before you mentioned it, Gordon, I was thinking about Jung, because he's all about the idea that we have this thin layer of consciousness over on top of a deep unconscious, and Freud as well, although I think Jung explored it maybe more richly. But and so then we could say that society-wide we need to do the same thing, especially if we want to really start thinking together. And that would, it's like I have this image, you have the same like layered thing where we have the rational stuff on top, the things that we all know maybe, and then you'd have layers below, and maybe these lower layers would include the human relationships, maybe a community conversing together would come to rational insights that the community finds rational, but the hive mind of the earth only feels as a hunch or something like that. It's interesting to think about how, if we're forming a collective intelligence, if it's anything like our own individual intelligence, then we would have a deep unconscious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's awe-inspiring and terrifying to consider what's in that deep unconscious.
Yeah.
And the relationship, the tensions, the internal tensions in motivation, as we can experience as humans, between the wanting to stick to a diet versus reaching for the ice cream, or whatever else it might be. So that, yeah, awesome and terrifying.
Yeah.
I think that's what really dialogos for me has been really beneficial in, is to, when you have that embodied discussion, we realize that there's more to us than we think, and that what wants to be discussed is something that we face internally. We face that resistance. So dialogos is that sort of way in which we sort of navigate what we want to be said and how to be truthful.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you brought that in, because I specifically wanted to talk to you about dialogos, Christian, I think, as I often do. And yeah, and it fits quite nicely, because I agree, the more you can approach dialogos, the more it seems like the intelligence that's generated is not, it's not an overly rational or overly simplified intelligence. It's something more, I almost want to say embodied, although there is no body, but it's more wholesome. And it's not like we're leaving intuition behind. Not both in our participation, we're not leaving intuition behind, but even in the product, intuition has come along for the ride, which is great. And I guess it just, thinking through this now, it just lends more weight for me to the idea that dialogos, or something related, who knows how these terms will change and evolve and stuff, but that will be crucial to the collective intelligence on a global scale. I don't know how exactly, but it's still more and more, I become more and more confident in that feeling, or that belief or expectation.
Right, and do you see like a sort of like end game as to what can be achieved within having a bunch of minds together and discussing what is truthful for them?
End game, it's a good question. When you ask that question, it makes me think of how I've just realized that. So I've had a discomfort with saying whether something is or isn't dialogos this whole time, ever since I've been seriously attempting it. And just near the end of my chat with Gordon yesterday, I think I realized why. It's because I don't think you can. I think dialogos is something we approach. It's maybe not something we ever get to and rest there. And so now back to your question, is there an end game? Now that that's shifted in my head, I want to answer your question and say, well, maybe there's not really an end game. Maybe it's more about upgrading the conversations that people have generally. And to the extent that everybody in the world, or let's say the average skill of things like dialogos, as that increases, our collective intelligence will increase. Yeah, and then there's like a trailing thought of like, do we need to, which has been a theme for me in this whole project. Can we get small groups of dialogos to scale up into crowd dialogos? I don't want to explore that directly right now, but I wonder if you even need to design that, or maybe not. Maybe it's really just everybody gets better at it, and we find that, when we all speak together, then Gordon goes and speaks with 3 other people, and that happens all over the place. We find that worldwide we're coming to these conclusions and making changes that are good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Christian.
I mean, I like that observation, because I really feel that there's a certain utility, and I think we need to like widen out the utility as much as we can and try to like hone in on what is useful about this practice. So I think like the word that comes to mind is synthesis, because when I think of, well, we're dealing with a postmodern age, and we're dealing with the culture war and all the relativism that involves with it, you sort of have to like come to a realization that you need to actually build something, because what postmodernism does at its worst is tear down and destroy.
Yeah. So
really, when we talk about a sort of synthesis, it goes back to Hegelian dialectic with thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. So modernism plus postmodernism is meta-modernism. And when I'm talking with David H., I really get the sense that I imagine that he wants to have some sort of meta-modernist vision, because he keeps on saying, I want to take the best of the wisdom traditions and apply them to life. So I think that we have this capacity where we know what is being critiqued, we know what is good. All we have to do is sort of carve out or propose a set of principles that can enable us to move forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I follow.
I'm listening to this conversation. These days, I'm filtering this through a podcast I listened to just last weekend with Meg Wheatley, who has been studying like learning organizations and self-organizing principles for since like the 70s. And in this podcast from it was Leadermorphosis is the name of the series, the podcast series, and I think the episode was sometime in 2019. Meg was discouraged about the state of the world in a certain sense, and her project now is developing islands of sanity, as she calls it, and the recognition that based on her work as an anthropologist, that societies have a fairly predictable life cycle, and our global capitalist society, as at least our Western society right now, is at a recognizable stage of dissolution and collapse, and a better world is probably 200 or 300 years in the future, if at all. Or possibly 700 years in the future, according to the Dalai Lama. But I don't know where he gets his information from, so I'm a little suspicious.
Can't exactly peer review the Dalai Lama, can you?
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole nother topic. But,
yeah.
So I'm mindful of these ideas, these memes, if you will, that infected my thinking over the weekend, but have also it's not the first time, and so I'm resonating a lot with what you guys are saying. That the value in doing this kind of work can't be about thing, right? We mentioned Endgame.
You're cutting out. Christian, is Gordon cutting out for you as well? Okay, let's just give it a second then. Well, I'm relieved it's not my internet. I'm so frustrated with my internet troubles these days. My goodness.
Especially utility. Like these days, it's like you have to have internet.
Yeah, especially if we're doing this kind of stuff. Oh shit. Oh, fuck me. I keep forgetting that this keeps recording when my internet goes out, so then I always curse. I'm always like, I let my visage of a civilized human slip for a moment. Okay.
That's sort of idea against synthesis, or at least
Okay.
a sort of rebuttal against synthesis.
It's not a rebuttal against synthesis so much as, although it's interesting that you might take it that way. It's a concern that for all the synthesizing we might do here, what are we really accomplishing with the synthesis of our ideas? And answering that concern, I think you guys both addressed it to some degree, that part of it is not, none of us are Elon Musk, and even Elon Musk is not changing the direction of the world as much as Donald Trump is, and even Donald Trump is not changing the direction of the world in a whole. I mean, he's got more influence in some ways, but the world's on a trajectory that is so much bigger than any one of us as individuals, and even small groups of us can do very much about. And does that invalidate what we're doing or what we're trying to do? Not in any way. In fact, I think it makes it all the more precious. But I don't want to go down a path of thinking that we're actually going to save the world, even by doing this precious and wonderful thing. So that's where I'm at.
So when you say you don't want to say or tell ourselves that we're going to save the world, when I hear that, I agree in a particular way, and that particular way is that we're not going to get there and be like, oh, we made it, and then be done. That's part of the way in which I agree. And also the other way in which I agree is that we aren't going to go save the world. It's not going to be us that did it, you know, and they're not going to hold parades for us, you know. We might get fame. I like to fantasize that one day these videos, they'll go back and say, oh, these guys, but who knows, you know, I mean, who knows how many other people are doing this as well. And it's going to be something that we all do together. And I guess for me, the pride that I could hold if that happens is that I was involved in a network that was pioneering in a certain direction as others were. Yeah, I think Gordon has frozen again.
Yeah, that's pretty unfortunate. Yeah, I guess what I'd add on to that is because, like, recently when COVID happened, I just like focused on ways on how the world is messed up and how the world can be better. And I guess one of the ideologies that I came across was meta-modernism through Hansi Freinacht and / Daniel Gortz. And I think, like, yeah, like what struck me is that it is this thing that is not really understood or completely understood, but it's something that I'd want to be more known and to have more people participate in, so that they're able to see a path forward, because it's not clear to me that postmodernism is going to lead us to anything good, or at least really substantial.
I mean, I would even I mean, for me, it's quite clear that it can't. It seems incapable. It's good at tearing stuff down in a way that's necessary, but it's not enough. So
yeah, but I also think that in order to like get up there, we also need to understand what postmodernism really is. So like, how familiar are you with postmodernism?
I mean, I think pretty familiar. I guess I haven't explicitly read books, but I still feel pretty familiar with the term. I mean, for me, postmodernism is basically the realization that we can't be certain of anything, and that's fair. There's so many fair points about postmodernism, and that, I guess, for me, is at the top of the list. And maybe that's, in a way, that's all there is. Hey, Gordon.
Hello.
So we're just discussing. So I was just trying to say what I think postmodernism is, in response to what Christian just said. So postmodernism is, cool. Yeah, we've realized that we can't be certain of anything at all. There's no ground on which to base any framework we have, and there's an argument to be made, although I think there's a mistake in it, but it is in a way a fair argument, that it's all interpretation. And I think the mistake is then to say, therefore there's no truth. So that's sort of like my idea of postmodernism. And I think postmodernism, I don't know if it says this explicitly or not, but it seems like often packaged into postmodernism is like, oh, there's no truth. So to repeat that, I think the mistake is that postmodernism says, okay, therefore there's no truth, or at least that's what is packaged in the idea, and I don't take issue with that. Fuck.
The fun thing is his recording is picking up what he's saying perfectly well. We're going to come through all garbled.
Okay, I'm recording now for what it's worth. I don't know how much continuity there will be for viewers, but yeah. Well, we can all try to think of what last had our attention, and whoever speaks, we can sort off from there. We were talking about postmodernism. I really like Christian's, I really liked the parallel Christian drew. It felt like it was latent in my head, and he brought it out, where there's two ideas that I like, and Christian put them together. And actually, I think, Christian, you had a name for this, but there's the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And you said that was part of, did you say Hegelian dialectic? Is that what you said?
Yes.
See, I didn't know that's what that was. So that's already cool. Now I have a term. But then you explicitly said you had modernism, postmodernism, and then meta-modernism in that same pattern. And I really like those two together, because for me, that Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is so reliable in my life. I mean, it helps me understand what I go through just as a person. And so to put modernism and postmodernism in that box comforts me, because I can now, it's like, okay, well, a synthesis is coming, it seems. So that's nice.
Yeah, and I continue to like stress the importance of seeing the good and the bad with postmodernism, because what postmodernism is discussed in our culture is something as a destructive force. And so, but I'd also argue that postmodernism, or sort of like the green meme that we refer to in spinal dynamics, is sort of pushing for more community and egalitarianism, which I think are really good things. And I'd also argue that does not necessarily have to be sort of like completely equal, but nearly equal, something more fair, something more just. And so I think like these are good causes to be in the name of. The question is the theory and the practice sort of aligning themselves? And we sort of see sort of indications that it's not, but I think like I'd like to work towards something that is something more aligned. And I think this sort of dialogos group is something that is trying to achieve this. It feels postmodernism at first, but I'm sort of like thinking that it can become more of a meta-modern space.
Mm-hmm.
You allow me to use that term. So just wondering what you guys think.
I'm with you, and I wonder if you have more, if you can identify more characteristics of meta-modernism, or help me understand what it is. I don't know, what do you see as meta-modernism?
Right. So I guess meta-modernism, as I kind of explained before, is like this integration of good between what is modern and what is postmodern. It's sort of meta-modernism sort of has a compromise where if you have a sort of idealistic belief in the modernism, but also a sort of skeptic belief in postmodernism. I like to use the idea of hierarchy, because Daniel Gortz has talked about the idea of hierarchy. So for the modernists, like the hierarchy is good in that it enables and maximizes strength and potential and abilities. But the postmodernism would say that it becomes too steep, it becomes too oppressive, and that therefore we need to take it down. But Daniel Gortz with better modernism says you can sort of have developmental hierarchies. You can have people with sort of different sets of skill sets, and that is still good in whatever you're trying to accomplish. So it's that acknowledgement that you can have like healthy sets of hierarchies, mostly with merit and sort of initiative, but it doesn't necessarily have to be sort of tyrannical or oppressive. And when I think of like a flatter hierarchy, I think of like Logan, Ariel, and David leading the conversation, hosting and facilitating. It's not necessarily that they have a sort of superiority over us, but that it's sort of a way to sort of go against this sort of free-for-all mentality that one might be inclined to have. It's enabling generative discussion to take place rather than to sort of corral the sheep. Just put an example.
Yeah, having some form is necessary. We were talking about this somewhat yesterday, and it's another manifestation of a pattern. At one level, it's in breath, out breath, or a dynamic tension, right? That's anywhere you look, the structures seem to be held together. Functional structures are held together by something that pulls them together, and there's something that pushes out against that force pulling them together. And you see it in human bodies and bones and tendons, and lots and lots of other things. And so that's the quality of having a hierarchy, having a small group of decision makers, so that there actually can be structure, so that we don't devolve into a 3-hour conversation of what are we going to talk about. Somebody can actually just say, no, we're going to talk about this, and
put a flag down, to use yesterday's terminology.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. So, modernism, postmodernism, meta-modernism. Am I right to hear, modernism thinks that a hierarchy and a structure, we've found the ultimate structure. That's why we're modern. Postmodern says, yeah, no, structures are all bullshit. All of them are wrong. And now we have to synthesize those two positions. And metamodernism somehow does that. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay. Go ahead, Logan.
it makes me think of game B in that when people talk about what is game B, all we can really say is we can start carving out a space for it. Like nobody actually has a plan, a list of steps or characteristics for game B. We have design criteria. And so, and I'm reminded of that because now when we're talking about metamodernism, by the way, it's the first time I've really delved into the topic, even though I do like the word, partially because I always hated postmodernism. And anyway, but yeah, it seems like also all we can do at this point is start talking about design criteria. So we know that, and one of them has to be that it has to take modernism and postmodernism and synthesize them. So that's like a design criteria. Maybe that's the design criteria, and then we could get maybe, start digging into that and figure out maybe more specifics or examples. Christian, you had an example earlier, which I don't remember now, but you laid out like one example that we could
Flattened hierarchy?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. The hierarchy thing. So, modernism says hierarchies are good, and well, just as Gordon was saying, postmodernism says no, they're all shit. So metamodernism has to somehow balance those two. And Christian, you were sort of saying, well, one way that you could do that is to have hierarchies that don't ossify and kind of are focused more on skill sets. But and when you said that, I was like, yeah, that is one lens or category or example of what metamodernism should be doing, will have to do.
Right, a sort of skill set that is not necessarily a sort of domineering or tyrannical enabler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Christian, you mentioned spiral dynamics, and it sounds like you're more familiar with it than I am, perhaps. So, I'm early in the Dunning-Kruger curve with spiral dynamics. Enough to be dangerous. I guess I've gone far enough to know that I don't know very much.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do these modernism, postmodernism, metamodernism, do they map distinctly onto stages? Is postmodern green meme, are they essentially an identity, a logical identity?
I was just wondering, what do you mean by logical identity?
That there are two different words for exactly the same thing.
Two different words for exactly the same thing. Do you mean as like a completely separate category altogether? Because you can say that postmodernism is a sort of extension of modernism. It just happens like a parasite of sorts. But there's also
I think Gordon was talking about postmodernism and something from spiral dynamics. Is that right, Gordon?
Yeah. So if I understand spiral dynamics, and I may not, but it's a talk of progression of individuals and collectives through the various stages that are labeled with colors, right? And red, blue, orange, green, I think are the sort of the relevant ones that are observable in society now. And so to what extent, so I think that postmodernist thought falls within the green meme. The stages are referred to in spiral dynamics, I guess, as memes. And so that postmodernism is very green. Modernism, is it very orange? It's very orange. Okay. And so is it really how close is the correspondence between talking about if, as we're talking about modernism and postmodernism, is does that map onto orange to green transition with a high degree of fidelity or only marginal fidelity? I'm curious about that. I tend to think of them as being almost equivalent, that depending on the language of the group that I'm conversing with, I could use modern and postmodern or orange and green, and articulate the same concepts with two different words.
Yeah, this is a good question, because I sort of feel that it's a sort of like map that is a priori placed onto certain phenomena. So again, it's the idea like the map is not the territory, but I think of like spiral dynamics as like as a good map to like discuss what has been going on in history. Like it's not a completely perfect map, because you sort of have certain I guess events that may counteract like these sort of like narratives that we do impose, that are essentially opposed onto the sort of what we call civilization. But yeah, ultimately, I think that philosophy does have this sort of like progression. It does. We know that there's sort of like this pre-modern, then modern, but we're still working out through what is essentially beyond modernism. So we sort of fall in kind of, we have like we adopt a meta perspective, but we don't have like we don't have that opportunity to fully zoom back and observe like what we fully experienced. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I was asking a pretty sort of precise and definitional question, which is we don't need to hash it down. We don't need to pin it down.
Well,
what I'm hearing you say is,
go ahead.
Okay. Well, what I'm hearing you say is that you feel like right now we are definitely at the at the point of seeing what next emerges. You know, what's whatever comes after green, right? We're actually participating in bringing it forth. Irrespective of which map we use, modern, postmodern, or orange, green, turquoise, or whatever it is, we happen to be at that birth point, at that transition point.
Yeah, and I agree, Gordon, that, well, what was the question? I guess I agree with the observation that for me, the modern postmodernism seems to be, I'll say, synonymous with the orange and the green. And I also have experienced like, okay, I guess I don't use spiral dynamics much. I've witnessed other people using them in ways where I think, oh, okay, they're saying green and they mean what I sort of mean when I think postmodernism. That does seem to map reliably. Yeah. I guess just thinking about that a bit more, the spiral dynamics, it seems like if it does reflect that quite a bit, what's added is the idea of progression. So we can talk about modernism and postmodernism. That doesn't necessarily come with the idea that we're going somewhere. Spiral dynamics actually puts it in that frame. So maybe, I mean, that's one difference anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sort of like frame that provides a more holistic look on whatever epoch or whatever sort of theological history we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I should really go. I'm going to be picked up here soon. But this was great. I really love how organic the conversation was, and then how we talked about dialogos, but also without abandoning the early conversation. That was magical, and that kind of magic again is a hallmark of dialogos for me. When the things you want to talk about come up, even though you abandon, like even though you knew you shouldn't try too hard to get there. And so like I personally didn't even, I was just about to start to think like, oh, should I like interrupt this and ask Christian, and like but then it came out, and that was just pretty cool. And then again, as I said, without abandoning the early stuff. So very cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that there was a sort of like common thread of enthusiasm throughout like whatever we talked about. That really hit home for me.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, ditto on all of the above. It's we're talking about my favorite stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
This is stuff I think about all the time. So it's great to find other people that are really interested in deeply unpacking it and bouncing it
Yeah.
around. Really appreciate
Cool.
it.
Let's keep doing it.
Right on. I'm
Alrighty.
with you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, talk soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care. See ya.
See you later.